welcome to the Beyond Cinema studio, Laurie Anderson. Congratulations on having this film/collage of memories and art and experiences in the Heart of a Dog. For you, was it really difficult or deceptively easy to conceptualize this kind of representation of your world in this rectangular kind of box that is?
I got to like the box.
Yeah.
Usually boxes just give me the creeps. I mean, so if I'm using film in a live show, which I often do, it's like 5 different screens and they're all different shapes, like corners and
sometimes it's on rough surfaces that it's projected,
or the floor or something, and trying to create a kind of world. But I got to like the box, and the stories in this collection they're not so different from the way a live show might move from story to story. So, and some of them are from those shows as well.
Yeah. Did you find that in creating the piece, like I know that everyone has their own first memories, right? And sometimes our memories are reinforced, or what we think we remember firsthand we're actually remembering just because it existed as a photo. When you're looking through all this material, the 8mm film, all this other stuff, did you find that memories were then like kind of reawakened in you, or did you find that your memory of incidents was actually a flawed one based on some other recollection as opposed to the actual experience? Like, what kind of relationship did kind of going through this exercise cause you to experience?
Well, first of all, this isn't a film about me. I'm using some stories from my past, but it's not like a portrait or anything. Or it's about stories. It's about how stories are made and what you do with them. So it's about some of them are mine, or some of them are some of them are childhood stories, in the sense that when someone says what's your childhood like, you haul out a couple of stories. I was short, or I was shy, or I was like and they don't really represent you as a kid kind of coming into the world going, what is this? Which is fortunate, because if we really told everybody about our entire childhood, childhood's the way we experience them, it would be very long-winded. So the short form is what we use, and so it's about how when you tell a story like that, and you tell it and you tell it and you tell it, sometimes it's a way of forgetting how it works. The second story in the film is also about language. It's about a speech my mother gave on her deathbed, and she's a very formal person, and all her 8 kids are around. She's almost like stepping up to the microphone going, thank you all for coming. There's a very kind of, and then she gets kind of distracted and she starts talking to all the animals that are up in the ceiling, and then she's back to the microphone talking to history, to the family, to saying goodbye as things are shutting down. So some of these things are about how language falls into pieces, and how or how stories get slapped onto you, or like somebody says, you're the kind of guy who does this or that. You go, no, I'm not. You got it all wrong. Your story's all wrong. The NSA comes into the story building process as well, when it collects data and information about you and tries to make a story that is some version of you as well. So it's about the construction of stories and what happens to them.
So when you watch this, do you feel like it's representative of the framework of the things you think about when someone asks you to think about the most important things?
Not sure what you mean by that question, but I'm going to try to answer it in one way, which is one of the kinds of stories I try to tell in this movie is something that you don't hear. You just see very rapid words,
right.
And they're addressed to you in a way, your secret self. The one that's we're having this sort of conversation now, but we're thinking about completely different things, and and language is going through our mind while we're having this conversation about a film, and if we were not doing this in such a formal way, we'd also be checking our email and walking down the street and doing several other things. So it's to some extent about splitting your mind into a few different ways and following. This is a film that asks you to do kind of difficult things, relate to this narrator who becomes relentlessly talking for 77 minutes without, nonstop, just like, and then asking you to do things like look through the eyes of a dog, then look through the lens of a surveillance camera, and then fly through the bardo, and then identify. So you're not identifying with anybody or analyzing their stories, or it's also, like I said, not really about me. It's a lot. You're moving through different worlds and seeing things from radically different points of view. So it's an essay. It's an essay about things, and it's an essay about love and about death. So those are the central things, and the central parts of this film are things that my teacher, Mingyur Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan guy, and he has disappeared, actually. We haven't seen him for over 4 years. He went off to sit in a cave and, figure things out. And the night before he was going to leave, he was going to leave with his 2 attendants, these 2 lamas. And the night before he was going to leave for this 3-year thing, he left by himself. He left a note, "Don't look for me." And so we haven't seen him for a long time, but he left a lot of little short videos and books and things. And one of the things that he said, which I try very hard to do, is he said, you should practice how to feel sad without being sad.
Right.
Very hard to do. So the film is about sadness and about looking at things that are and looking at suffering. And what do you do about it? So basically his approach is don't just sit there and go, oh God, that's so sad. Do something. There's something I did was make this film. And the other part 2 of this is do not be sad yourself.
Yeah.
Big waste of time.
Well, that was the thing about the ultimate question of, what do you call love?
Yeah.
Right? And I love that, the answer for that within these lyrics and within this representation was that it's time, right? It's like something that we try to control but can't, something we can't ever get enough of, something that we're always trying to grab a hold of. And so this kind of, it felt meditative to watch it.
Yeah.
And so going through that experience, you do become aware of appreciating those breaths and those moments, perhaps because we're following the rhythm of the narrator as well, and so that language is we're being swept away into that both visual and oral language simultaneously.
Yeah, and hopefully trying to be in the present, because turning time around then is just about this kind of vortex, and it says, in a certain way, don't be nostalgic. It wasn't so much better back then. And don't wait for it to improve, because it's probably not going to improve. In the future sometime when everything's going to be, it's going to all line up.
Yeah.
Just try to, be here.
And yet bookended as well with the birth of Lullabelle.
Yeah, there's a lot of beginnings and endings too. But I try not to. There is no neat end. There's not very much that's neat in this film. It's kind of it's messy because it's plotless. I don't know about your life. Mine does not have a plot at all. So when you try to impose a story on top of a life, it always looks kind of uneasy. Or when you see a film where there's plot line and the end, you're like, nah, I don't know anybody like. No, that's not to say that so much of the great plays and books, they have these narrative arcs. I mean, I like them, but I just would not be able to make something like that myself because I don't believe in the neatness of that. And I also don't think it has to look like life. Those works of art don't look very much like life, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be a mirror of you. you know.
And so when the people that first engaged you to kind of undertake the exercise, the initial version of the exercise, did they give you a specific thing to explore, or they just gave you freedom to create?
They wanted my philosophy of life. I was like, what? No way. I don't have one, and I definitely am not going to put it in the shape of a film and make somebody watch it. No thanks. You know, this is like, that's too. That's ridiculous. So I started making all these stories, and in the end, it is my philosophy of life, I have to say.
Yeah.
So it kind of backfired.
Yeah. So
it was Arte TV that asked me to do this. Art is French-German channel, so they have a series of artists like talking about the meaning of their work, the meaning of their lives, something like this.
I remember last year there was one called 20,000 Days on Earth or something. It was Nick Cave going through his...
Right, I saw that.
Yeah, which is also pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And when you talk about that concept of a play of your own mind, it very much represented that philosophy as well. But you literally do go and find other philosophers and embed their words within this as well. So both the words of, or the actions and words of your teacher, Sri Rinpoche, but also these kind of more known quote unquote philosophers like Kierkegaard and obviously the words of David Foster Wallace, who's in the current zeitgeist still.
That was the working title for the film for me. Every love story is a ghost story, and I love that phrase. And that was, I think that just a phrase that he used now and then to talk about love and time, and it was too long for a title. And this is also the title of a Russian film, Bulgakov. Yeah, Bulgakov, and the same guy who wrote Master and Margarita. I didn't really realize that until after I signed off on the title, and I realized, whoa, there's another Heart of a Dog. That story is like a Russian story that has kind of weird things in common in a funny way, because it starts off with a mad scientist who sees a dog in the snow, and he decides, I'm going to make him into a man, and he does a bunch of operations on this dog, turns him into a man, but it's a really unsuccessful experiment. And then it's also a lot about kind of secret comments on communism. So I thought, oh, well, my film begins with an operation as well, with a dog, kind of mad scientist thing of like trying to pretend to give birth to your dog, which is a geeky way to start a film, and it also has a lot of comments on culture as well, and surveillance culture in particular.
Yeah, well, you talk about the surveillance culture and obviously living in New York and the representation of that, and then the dogs in the West Village and all that sort of stuff as well. And yet, at the hour mark, we're treated to this kind of snowflake, in a forest, with like this forest vista for that gives us this moment of just a peaceful calm. How do you find that peace and calm within a city like New York?
This is all shot within a couple blocks of my house in New York, and also a place that I have in Long Island. So those trees are in my backyard. It's a very homemade film. It's shot iPhones and 5D, and there were a couple of places that were shot other places, but California, and also a hospital. And I have to say, there is no more fun than a hospital gives you a whole wing, and you and your friends get to dress up as doctors and like push equipment around and do stuff in the hospital. That is really fun.
It's Kubrick,
but yes, there are other moments of the film is about sound as well. So that moment of silence in the middle is very much to the point. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is the book in the middle of the movie, is also called The Great Liberation Through Hearing. So the Tibetans believe that the eyes go dark, brain flatlines, the heart stops. Hammers are still... It's the last time to go. The last sense to go. So they use that portal to give instructions to the dying person. They yell, "You are dead now! You're dead!" And they give instructions about what to do. Anyway, there was also a story in the film about another story about sound, in which I had a story about my own childhood. It was like, well, when I was a kid, I broke my back, and I was 12, and I was a punk, and I hated adults. I thought they were idiots. You remember when you were 12 and you thought you felt sorry for adults. They were so inept and just sad, So, that kind of kid, and I was told I wouldn't walk again, and I was like, oh, come on, this is like, and they were reading these stupid stories, and so that was my story. Now, I was telling the story about being in this hospital with burn victims, because they threw all the kids in the same ward. You just throw them all, what do they care? So, I had this sudden recollection of being in the hospital, and it was an hallucination to sound. I just felt like I could hear the hospital suddenly, and it was like really intense, because I could hear all these kids crying and screaming, and these sounds that are really they are the sounds that children make when they're dying. They are there's no other sound like that. And I also then remembered how incredibly afraid I was, and how nobody would talk about anything. They would wake up and a bunch of beds would be gone when the kids had died. And I was like, it was extreme. So this was a story about remembering through sound, and that in the process of telling the story about my childhood, I had just through repetition, telling it over and over, was just forgetting it more each time I told it. So in that point of the film, there's silence, and you just are looking out to snow falling in the woods, and I love visual loops. I'm a visual loop person. I like them a lot. I just like staring at something very repetitive.
And yet, the film does have a finality in terms of it also being offered up as being dedicated to Lou as well. So there's kind of, even though there's another chapter potentially to come, at that moment it ends, right? So why was this a good piece to dedicate to your husband? Or will all pieces kind of from now on also be partly dedicated?
Oh, well, I don't know if all pieces forever will be dedicated to Lou, but he and I talked about everything every 5 minutes, so this is a kind of letter to him, in a way, and I don't think he exists somewhere, believe me. I don't think he's in heaven listening to me. I think he's gone. I don't believe in heaven. But I do believe that people can make things, and they can. I think his music is everywhere in so many people's lives and in their ears, and that making things. That's why making things is so great. They do stick around for a while anyway, unlike us.
Very cool. All right, well, thanks again for coming in and spending a few minutes with us. It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah, same here.